Wilson! Wilson, I'm sorry! These words echoed throughout the vast expanse of the ocean as Chuck, the main character in Castaway, loses his only remaining human connection, a volleyball with a face made of blood. Now, not everyone can relate to struggling for survival on an island for years, but many people today struggle to find human connection on their own personal islands of solitude. After the waves of panic and worry that flooded our lives because of COVID, many people reported feeling alone and disconnected. I'm sure that nearly every single one of you longed desperately for human connection during these times. Amidst this panic and chaos, articles claiming that COVID killed the handshake and the hug started circulating, and people wondered if we would ever engage with others via touch again. Although I certainly believe touch is being strangled out of American society, many more suspects have a hand in the death of touch. Despite culture's attempts to assassinate touch, I believe we need to resurrect that necessary method of communication. In the emotionally distant American culture, the need for healthy touch in citizens' lives has skyrocketed, which demands both personal and cultural reforms. Today in my speech, I will first define both touch and touch deprivation. I will then provide research that reveals the need for touch in human life and reveal the culprits that have tried to snuff the final sparks of touch out of American society. I will provide solutions to better help wage the war for the lives and mental health of our parents, siblings, children, neighbors, and every downtrodden and dismayed individual. And to begin, I must first lay the foundation to explore the solutions for touch starvation. And so, throughout my speech, touch deprivation or touch starvation will be defined as the negative physiological or psychological effects on the human body and mind that come with a lack of touch. Such symptoms include anxiety, nervousness, stress, emotional distance, difficulties with open communication, and loneliness. The feelings of loneliness can have catastrophic effects on a person's both mental and physical state, changing how they interact to and relate with the people around them. Although romantic touch plays an important role in marriages, I will not be discussing it during my speech. When referring to touch, I will primarily be discussing platonic touch. So only platonic touch, meaning touch devoid of romantic intention, will be discussed during my speech. Both the context and situation, whether between friends and families or between complete strangers, will determine how touch occurs and the methods by which it occurs. Third, to limit the scope of my topic, I will primarily discuss the American view of touch. Despite growing scientific evidence that skin-to-skin contact is beneficial to human health, American social norms inhibit this most basic form of human interaction and communication. Although I may refer to studies or examples outside of America, this will not be the main form of my argumentation. Finally, with such a varied audience, each individual needs a differing amount of touch based off of many factors. Yet the desire for touch still remains within the whole body of humanity. In my interview with Rebecca Kolsak, an attachment theory-based counselor, she explains how touch evolves over the lifetime of an individual. She said that touch continues to be important throughout all phases of life. However, the ways in which it is occurring can shift, and the amount of it occurring can change. Each person may desperately need touch, care, and should receive the proper attention that they deserve. Therefore, I will discuss how touch transforms throughout the lifetime of an individual from infancy up to adulthood. Now that we have defined some common terms and idea, let us move on to examining the need for touch. Although touch has suffered blows at the hands of vicious assailants, the drastic detriments of physical neglect spur us to action to save our children and our future citizens. In my interview, Mrs. Kolsak emphasized the integral nature of touch during the foundational moments of a child's life. She explained that touch is vital for the development of children, primarily because it is the very first method of communication. Because during pregnancy and immediately after, both mother and child relate information and comfort via touch. However, the importance of touch was not always as recognized, seeing as it was a horrifying image of neglect which brought touch deprivation to the spotlight in the 20th century. After the death of dictator Nicolae Ceausescu in Romania, the plight of the Romanian orphans in 1990 brought the tragic effects of touch deprivation to renewed public attention. More than 100,000 children were institutionalized and neglected during these times. This broke the hearts of anyone who saw it. The news reports show children who were neglected, traumatized, starved, and abused, and told stories of infants who were abandoned in cribs for entire days without human contact. The mental and physical consequences that the Romanian orphans suffered into their adulthood demonstrated the consequences for neglecting touch. This highlighted the need for action concerning the health of our children. A lack of touch in infancy or early childhood has enormous consequences, which are easily evident in their behavior towards peers, as well as their ability to self-regulate. Dr. Tiffany Field, director of the Touch Research Institute in the Department of Pediatrics at the University of Miami School of Medicine, conducted a study comparing the levels of aggressiveness in children with the amount of physical contact they received from parents and peers. When comparing the two groups, preschoolers and adolescents were less physically affectionate and more aggressive in the United States versus France. Further, the US youth received less physical affection as preschoolers, and as adolescents, they engaged in more self-stimulating behaviors, perhaps to compensate for the lack of affection they received from parents and peers. Due to our observations, Dr. Field hypothesizes that a lack of attention from parents causes children to demonstrate higher amounts of self-stimulatory behavior. Self-stimulatory behavior, or stimming, are repeated physical or auditory behaviors that are used to process one's emotions. While not inherently negative, the widespread presence of these behaviors showed a lack of ability to regulate oneself, which can easily be taught through physical contact between parent and child. When combined with other factors, there are noticeable differences in behavior, so that less physical affection or more physical neglect contributes to greater aggression. Furthermore, studies show how positive touch from mothers create beneficial methods of regulation. Ruth Feldman, professor of developmental social neuroscience, conducted a study providing evidence that one function of maternal touch during times of infant distress is the activation of more mature self-regulatory strategies. This allows infants to move from the passive forms of regulation typical of the first few months of life to the use of more adaptive, self-organizing modes of regulation. Essentially, she claims that positive touch from mothers helps a baby to develop the ability to regulate themselves during times of stress. The need for positive methods of regulation continues into adulthood, which harms the ability for people to regulate themselves in the future when they haven't been positively taught how to regulate themselves in childhood. As a child ages, the negative impacts of touch deprivation change not only how they interact with others, but how they view themselves. Why? Well, body image suffers greatly when an infant lacks the proper amounts of touch from a caregiver. In a study relating a lack of touch in infancy to eating disorders later in life, Dr. Madlikta Gupta and Dr. Nicholas Shork observed that when body boundaries have not been consistently outlined by touch, caress, and secure holding, individuals in later life perceive their body self and body image as overly large, disproportionate, and misshapen. Providing significant amounts of touch can prevent these negative images from forming in the first place. Similarly, engaging with others via touch can help maintain a healthy body image. Dr. Gupta and Dr. Shork also found evidence that suggests that tactile nurturance continues to play an important role in the maintenance of a healthy body image into adulthood, which is especially relevant in the North American culture, which is immensely touch deprived. These examples are just a couple of the vast array of benefits that both children and adults receive when consistently engaging with others via touch. And so the far-reaching positive benefits of touch urge us to embrace a healthy view of touch. However, the attacks on a healthy concept of touch that developing children encounter, whether consciously or subconsciously, come primarily from the American hyperfixation on individualism. Although the individualistic mindset seeks to both isolate the individual and absolve them of their responsibility towards others, I believe that as Christians, we have a duty to reach out a hand to others in compassion. Individualism is defined by Cambridge Dictionary as the idea that freedom of thought and action are the most important qualities of a society, rather than shared effort and responsibility. The reason individualism is such a massive problem for Americans is because America has one of the most individualistic cultures in the world. Americans are more likely to prioritize themselves over a group, and they value independence and autonomy above all. This prioritization of the self leaves no room for most Americans to find the space within their own personal freedom to care and serve their fellow humans. By valuing freedom above all, this overemphasized ideal allows us to ignore and condemn our neighbors to a lifetime of suffering and solitude. Because individualism rejects shared effort and responsibility, we feel that our freedoms allow us to leave people stranded on their own personal islands of pain, even when they reach out a hand for help. This individualistic mindset strips society of the positive benefits of touch and reinforces the negative elements of a solitary line of thinking. In a society, touch is fundamentally linked to culture's level of individualism. America's individualistic culture makes non-sexual, interpersonal touch less frequent. However, the lack of touch also contributes to America's individualistic culture in a self-reinforcing cycle. In a sick cycle of negative reinforcement, American individualism burns away the ability for platonic touch to occur, which in turn produces a self-centered society. A self-centered society shapes sick citizens, which reject their salvation due to the underlying influences of individualism. This is important not just for the health of our family and our friends, but for the whole body of a nation. While Americans recoil at the very mention of physical contact with others, it is shown to increase fondness for the person who touched them. Studies reveal that when people receive an insignificant touch, they tip higher, rate the store or establishment more highly, and evaluate the other person more favorably. An insignificant touch, such as shaking someone's hand, has drastic effects on how they both view and reflect on their encounter with you later. The individualistic culture of our nation negatively influences both young Americans' personal lives and their view on touch. When people reach late pubescence or adulthood, they often gain access to the unrestricted use of technology. The tendency to develop an addictive relationship with technology harms the frequency of touch and the health of in-person relationships. While I cannot deny the obvious benefits of technology, such as the ability to connect with loved ones across the globe through instant messaging and video calls, I believe that the methods by which they dominate American personal lives leave them devoid of authenticity and true connection. A dependency on technology creates two massive problems. The first is that it creates a positive view of the very thing that harms them. The second is that it rips apart familial and platonic interactions. At Elon State University, students were asked how technology affected their personal relationships with others. 74% said that family or friends using technology while spending time together bothered them. 92% said that they believe technology negatively affects face-to-face interactions. And 92% again reported feeling a degradation in conversation while technology was present. The negative effects of a tech-dominated social life can easily be seen through the social isolation the world went through beginning in 2020. During the dark and dreary reign of COVID, the negative effects of touch deprivation surged through the American populace. Because touch starvation increases stress, depression, and anxiety, the lack of physical interactions with others releases the floodgates to a tsunami of negative physiological effects. For example, the hormones that increase with stress increase heart rate, blood pressure, respiration, and muscle tension, and can suppress the digestive system and immune system. While many factors went into increasing the levels of stress in America, one important method of lowering stress was completely ripped out of American society. Touch decreases the levels of these stress hormones. One reason these symptoms were so prevalent in the lives of Americans was due to the inability for many to communicate with others via touch. Despite having many methods to communicate with others via technology, this visualized the need for physical and in-person interaction. Dr. David Schramm, a Utah State University assistant professor, avidly seeks to protect families from the harmful nature of technology by founding two initiatives, Kick Technology Out of Beds and Kick Technology Off of Tables. Dr. David Schramm tries to provide two ways that families can begin to mend the relationships that have been harmed by the ever-expanding technological landscape. By decreasing the amount of time spent on devices during pivotal relationship building times, he believes that families can mend these broken relationships. As simple as it may seem, these programs serve as stepping stones to begin to reconquer a life overrun by dependency on technological devices. I wish I could provide such a simple solution to those of you whose friends, coworkers, and neighbors suffer from this terrible condition. However, it would not be as easily found. Although I could say giving each person you see a hug would fix this devastating social issue, my good conscience refrains me from doing so. Due to the social stigmas and the varying levels of comfort each person has to the idea of interacting with others physically, this statement would reduce this complex social issue to an almost comedic level of insensitivity. Combating the villains that have locked away touch would take both dedication and intentionality. Although some of you may still feel innocent of the duty to care for each other via touch, God calls you to do so in his one another commands. Obviously, the command to greet all the brethren with an holy kiss includes some kind of physical contact. But how are we, as Christians, supposed to interpret that today? Because we have different customs than those of the ancient Near East, we are to greet each other in different ways. The handshake, the hug, the high five, all of these are the common greetings of our day. And through the research previously provided, we know that touch can be more than just a display of our love for one another. Touch can be a physical reassurance. Therefore, touch plays an important role in commands to encourage one another and to bear one another's burdens. Some practical applications for these biblical commands are to first acknowledge hesitancies or negative stigmas you may possess surrounding touch. Then, you should try to integrate touch into your personal relationships with others based on their comfort levels. Also, you should try to prioritize face-to-face interactions over virtual ones whenever possible. Walking hand in hand with this idea, I would ask you to restrict your use of technology while in person with loved ones. Nothing shuts down conversation and connection like whipping out your phone to start scrolling or texting. Finally, as those of us take upon ourselves the responsibility of parenthood, I would ask that you remember the vitality of touch in a child's life. Every day, Americans are becoming more and more distant. To save our children and our future citizens, we must begin to fight for our right to care for each other via touch. Whether because of the dominant ideals of our day or because of the ever-expanding uses of technology, Americans willingly throw away human connections every day. The rise of DoorDash and Uber show that as technology infiltrates every part of our lives, we are constantly replacing genuine connections with automated services, leaving us starved for true connection. Streamlining and simplifying the American life may seem to benefit our citizens, but instead, what are we really doing? What we're doing is tossing aside the real human connections and intimacies that bring our nation together. Instead of calming the waves, we are whipping up a flood of misery and pain and passing it along to the next generation. Do we want to create a future where everybody struggles in solitude, where every person is a touch-starved castaway? Instead, I call you all to reach out a hand. We need to pull out those who are silently suffering, to rescue those who may not know how to rescue themselves, and to resurrect that necessary method of communication, touch. Thank you.
Great job, Aaron. Do we have questions for you?
Great job. How would you approach someone who felt uncomfortable with touch, and would you encourage them to gain comfortability or just to remain in their comfort zone?
Great question. I think the issue with that statement lies in the reasons that they have a discomfort with touch. There are many people who struggle with the idea of touch because of neurodivergence or something that happened in their past, something that inhibits them from communicating with others via touch. And in these situations, I wouldn't encourage them to do something that is physically discomforting to them in like a deeper and more emotional way. If their discomfort with the idea of touch comes from the social stigmas of our day, like the over-sexualization of touch or individualism, then I would ask them to reconsider why they feel touch so discomforting. But if it is the previously stated neurodivergency or past experiences, I would not encourage them to do so. Does that answer your questions? Okay.
Great job. Really like that speech. But would you say touch between family members or like very, very close friends is more important or more affecting to an individual than touch between strangers, like a handshake?
Yes, I would say that it's more important on an individual basis. I would say for a society, touch between strangers is still an important method of communication and growing our bonds with others. However, because of the frequency of touch between family members is just naturally higher, I believe it's a more necessary method to fix in our social age. Does that answer your question?
Yes. Other questions for Aaron? Let me practice. Do you have a question? Okay, come on.
So you explained benefits of touch in society. For those people due to neurodivergence or a past experience who find touch deeply uncomfortable, do they just miss out on those benefits, or is there some other way for them to still experience those?
Great question. I think that it is possible for them to engage in touch in differing ways. It takes a smaller part of their lives, and because touch is not the only method of close relationship building bonds with other people, there's many other methods of communication. You can engage with others in different ways to gain similar aspects, but I think it is an unfortunate side effect that some beneficial aspects of touch are lost. Does that answer your question?
Great job. Let's give a round of applause.